15. Black R&B legends who hid they were gay until the day they died. They sang the love songs we still play today, shaping R&B and soul into the soundtrack of generations. But behind the spotlight, 15. Black legends carried a truth they could never say aloud. Some fled the stage, some masked their longing in lyrics, and others died with secrets buried in silence. This is not just music history. It's a haunting reminder of the price of fame in an unforgiving world. Are you ready to uncover the untold lives behind the greatest voices of R&B hit? Like, subscribe, and stay with us on Legends of Black Excellence. Luther Vandross. Luther Vandross was more than just a singer. He was the embodiment of romance for an entire generation. Born in 1951 in New York City, he rose from humble beginnings to become one of the greatest voices in R&B history. Over the course of his career, Vandross sold more than 35 million records worldwide, and became known as the velvet voice of soul music. Songs like Here and Now, A House Is Not a Home and Never Too Much remain cornerstones of modern R&B, often played at weddings and anniversaries, carrying timeless emotion that still moves listeners decades later. But behind the glory was a secret. Luther never publicly shared his sexuality. Despite writing and singing some of the most heartfelt love songs ever recorded, he avoided interviews about his personal life, preferring to cultivate the image of a solitary romantic man. Friends close to him revealed that he feared coming out would not only destroy his career, but also deeply upset his beloved mother, Mary Ida Vandross, whom he cherished above all else. Industry insiders recall that Luther kept his personal life locked away. Patti LaBelle, one of his dearest friends, confirmed years later that Vandross was gay and that silence had been his greatest burden. He once confided to a colleague, "No one knows I'm in the life," a coded phrase at the time that spoke volumes about his fear of being exposed. During the 1980s and 1990s, when homophobia was rampant in both society and the entertainment industry, the cost of being honest could have been catastrophic for a black male R&B artist. His secrecy extended even to his relationships. Comedy writer Bruce Vilanch once recalled that Luther was extremely discreet, never daring to hold hands in public or reveal affection openly. Instead, Vandross poured his deepest emotions into his music. Every lyric of Here and Now feels like a promise of eternal love, yet fans only realized after his death that these words may have been cries of longing from a man who was never able to love freely in public. Despite his personal struggles, Vandross never faltered professionally. His performances were legendary, his stage presence magnetic, and his voice flawless. He collaborated with superstars such as Dionne Warwick, Whitney Houston, Mariah Carey, and Aretha Franklin, all of whom admired not just his talent, but also his perfectionism. In 2001, he performed The Closer I Get to You with Beyoncé, introducing his artistry to a new generation. Tragically, in 2003, Vandross suffered a severe stroke that left him unable to perform again. 2 years later, in 2005, he passed away at just 54 years old. The music world mourned deeply, but it wasn't just his voice that was missed. It was the realization that Luther Vandross, the man who taught the world about love, had never been able to live his own truth openly. Arthur Conley. Arthur Conley's story is both triumphant and tragic, a tale of a young man whose voice once electrified the world, but whose personal truth forced him into a lifetime of shadows. Born in 1946 in McIntosh County, Georgia, Conley grew up immersed in gospel music before discovering the raw power of soul. At only 21, he co-wrote and recorded the hit Sweet Soul Music with his mentor Otis Redding in 1967, and the song quickly became an anthem. With its jubilant horns and celebratory lyrics, it shot up the Billboard charts, reaching number 2 on the Hot 100 and selling more than 1 million copies worldwide. Overnight, Arthur was crowned a rising star of the soul era. Yet behind the spotlight and accolades, Conley carried a truth that weighed heavier than any stage light. He was a gay black man in an unforgiving America of the 1960s. At a time when R&B stars were expected to embody heterosexual romance, any deviation could destroy not only a career, but an entire life. Conley knew this intimately. On tours, he became known for avoiding wild backstage parties and steering clear of gossip. Even a single affectionate look could spark rumors, and for a young artist under intense scrutiny, the risk was unbearable. Many of his colleagues noticed a quiet sadness beneath his warm smile. He longed to live openly, but the soul scene of the 1960s left no room for authenticity. By the early 1970s, the pressure became too much, and Conley made a radical decision. He left the United States altogether. He relocated to Amsterdam, Netherlands, where he reinvented himself under the name Lee Roberts. There, he lived a quieter life, starting a small record company and producing music for others rather than chasing stardom himself. In Europe's more liberal environment, he finally experienced a measure of freedom, no longer forced to hide every gesture of love or affection. Friends recall that for the first time, Conley seemed comfortable laughing and living without the constant fear of exposure. If you were in Arthur's shoes, would you have chosen fame in silence or freedom in exile? Despite this newfound personal peace, Conley's absence from the American music scene left many fans bewildered. Some assumed he was overshadowed by his early hit, while others speculated he had lost interest in performing. Few knew the real reason America's prejudice had driven one of its brightest young stars into self-imposed exile. Unlike some artists whose private lives exploded into scandal, Arthur's story was quieter, more bittersweet. He did not collapse in public or burn out in controversy. He simply disappeared, leaving behind a haunting silence. In 2003, Arthur Conley passed away from cancer in the Netherlands at the age of 57. By then, his name had faded from popular memory, but among soul historians and those who knew him personally, his legacy was remembered with deep compassion. His brief but powerful career remains proof of the brilliance he carried, and his retreat to Europe remains a sobering reminder of how society's intolerance robbed him of the chance to shine fully. Arthur Conley's journey is not just about a hit song that lit up the airwaves. It is about the price an artist paid for love, identity, and dignity in a world that wasn't ready to accept him. Nona Hendryx. Nona Hendryx was never just a background figure in R&B. She was its creative engine, a daring songwriter whose vision pushed the boundaries of music and stage performance. Born in 1944 in Trenton, New Jersey, she rose to fame as a member of LaBelle, the trailblazing trio that gave the world the smash hit Lady Marmalade in 1974. Dressed in futuristic costumes and singing about female empowerment and sexual liberation, the group became icons of boldness in an era that often demanded conformity. But even as Hendryx projected confidence and innovation, she carried a secret that could have shattered her career if spoken aloud: her love for women. In the 1970s, the idea of an R&B diva openly acknowledging same-sex relationships was unthinkable. Industry executives, fans, and even fellow musicians often expected female performers to embody heterosexual fantasy. For Nona, this meant her personal truth could only exist behind closed doors. Insiders whispered about her private life. Rumors circulated that she had passionate relationships with women, including one alleged affair with a fellow artist. But Hendryx never confirmed these stories during her peak years. Instead, she channeled her emotions into her music. Her lyrics often hinted at desire, liberation, and freedom messages that resonated with listeners even if they didn't fully grasp the personal meaning behind them. Patti LaBelle once hinted that Nona was always brave in her music, even when she couldn't be in her life, a statement that only deepened curiosity about the truths hidden in her songs. On stage, Hendryx appeared as a self-assured goddess, draped in glitter and confidence. Off-stage, however, she lived cautiously aware that one public revelation could destroy not only her image, but the careers of those connected to her. In this way, she became both an innovator and a prisoner, celebrated for her fearless artistry while privately constrained by fear. It wasn't until decades later, after the height of her fame had passed, that Nona finally spoke more openly about her identity. In interviews in the 2000s, she confirmed that she had relationships with women, saying she felt freer to acknowledge her truth once the risk to her career was no longer looming. This late honesty redefined her legacy, transforming her from simply a brilliant artist into a quiet pioneer who endured and survived an oppressive era. Her courage and creativity also paved the way for younger generations. Artists like Janelle Monáe and Michelle Ndegeocello, who have spoken more openly about queerness in Black music, walk on a path that Nona helped clear, even if she did so silently. Nona Hendryx is celebrated not only for her music, but also for her resilience. She remains a symbol of both the cost and the triumph of living authentically, even if authenticity had to wait until the world was ready. Her story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful truths are not shouted from the stage, but whispered through timeless songs. Keith Barrow. Keith Barrow's story is one of brilliance cut painfully short, a rising star whose promise never had the chance to fully bloom. Born in 1954 in Chicago, Illinois, Barrow grew up surrounded by music. His mother, Willie Barrow, was a noted civil rights activist and pastor, and she nurtured his love for gospel singing. By the mid-1970s, Keith was making his way into the vibrant soul and disco scene, bringing with him a voice so smooth that critics nicknamed him the honey-voiced crooner. He first caught attention with songs like You Know You Want to Be Loved, 1976, and later Turn Me Up, 1979. His performances carried a polished warmth, mixing the emotional pull of soul with the infectious rhythms of disco. Audiences were drawn to his stage presence, handsome, charismatic, and able to deliver lyrics with sincerity that made fans believe every word. Industry insiders viewed him as a potential breakout star who could rival the greats of his generation. Yet behind the polished image lay a hidden truth. Friends and those closest to him knew Barrow was gay, but this was never acknowledged publicly. The R&B industry at the time was unwelcoming to any deviation from the heterosexual persona expected of male performers. For a young Black artist competing in a demanding marketplace, the stakes were especially high. Keith faced the painful dilemma of having to craft songs about love and romance for women while privately carrying a different reality in his heart. This duality weighed heavily on him. Some close friends recalled that during late-night recording sessions, Keith would quietly confess that he longed to write songs that truly reflected his feelings, but feared that doing so would end his career. The industry wasn't ready, and neither was the society around him. Instead, he disguised his truth in the music, creating ballads that resonated with audiences while masking his personal struggles. Unlike some of his contemporaries, Keith never became embroiled in public scandals. The press largely ignored the rumors about his sexuality, focusing instead on his looks, voice, and potential. This silence might have shielded him from controversy, but it also denied him the freedom to live openly. The burden remained private, a weight carried in solitude. Tragically, Keith Barrow's life was cut short. In 1983, at just 29 years old, he died from complications related to AIDS. His death shocked those who knew him and devastated fans who believed he was on the brink of greatness. At the time, the stigma surrounding AIDS meant that conversations about his life and identity remained hushed. He was mourned as a rising star gone too soon, but the truth of his struggles remained largely unspoken. Looking back, Keith Barrow's legacy is bittersweet. His voice, tender and honey-smooth, remains preserved in the handful of records he left behind. Yet his story is a haunting reminder of the cost of silence, in an era when being true to oneself could mean the end of everything. He is remembered as a shadowed talent, bright, fleeting, and tragically never fully recognized for who he truly was. Little Richard. Few artists have shaken the foundation of modern music the way Little Richard did. Born Richard Wayne Penniman in 1932 in Macon, Georgia, he grew up in a deeply religious household that struggled to accept his flamboyant personality. From those beginnings, he would become a force of nature exploding onto the stage with glittering suits, pompadour hair, and a sound that fused gospel R&B and boogie-woogie into what the world would come to call rock and roll. His classics, Tutti Frutti Long Tall, Sally and Good Golly Miss Molly didn't just sell millions. They reshaped music and influenced legends like Elvis Presley, the Beatles, and Prince. But behind the electric performances and boundary-pushing image, Little Richard lived with a constant internal battle. His sexuality was both visible and concealed at the same time. He flaunted gender-bending fashion, wore makeup, and exuded flamboyance, yet in interviews he often denied or contradicted his own words. In 1995, he boldly declared himself omnisexual, only to retract the statement later, retreating back into the safety of denial. This cycle of admission and retraction revealed a man torn between his truth and the suffocating expectations of both the black church and the mainstream music industry. The struggle was deeply personal. Richard once admitted that he fled home as a teenager after his father beat him for being different. The church he grew up in condemned him even as it shaped his musical foundation. On stage, he was free, a blazing star who blurred every line of gender and sexuality. Offstage, however, he was haunted by guilt, fear, and the knowledge that one wrong move could shatter his career. Throughout his career, he wrestled with contradictions. At times, he denounced homosexuality, calling it sinful, only to later embrace his queerness again. These reversals confused the public, but also highlighted the pressure he lived under. For a black artist in mid-20th century America already battling racism, exploitation, and the dangers of segregation, being openly gay was unthinkable. Richard knew this and played a dangerous balancing act, simultaneously challenging boundaries and protecting himself from destruction. Despite his personal struggles, his influence cannot be overstated. The Beatles invited him to teach them stagecraft. James Brown credited him as an inspiration. Prince borrowed his flamboyance and fearless embrace of sexuality. Even David Bowie acknowledged Richard as a pioneer of bending gender norms in music. Little Richard's contradictions, his fire on stage, his fear in private made him both human and iconic. He lived until 2020, passing away at the age of 87. By then, the world recognized him as the architect of rock and roll, but many also saw him as a queer icon who, despite never fully embracing that role publicly, left behind a legacy that paved the way for others. His story is not just one of music. It is one of courage, conflict, and the tragic cost of never being able to fully reconcile the man he was with the world around him. Little Richard burned like a flame, bright, untamed, and eternal, yet never allowed to burn as freely as it longed to. Johnny Mathis. Johnny Mathis, born in 1935 in Gilmer, Texas, is one of the most enduring and elegant voices in American music. Moving to San Francisco as a child, he trained in both music and athletics, even considered for the U.S. Olympic team in track and field before choosing a career in music. That decision changed his life and the sound of pop and R&B for generations to come. With his silky tenor and impeccable phrasing, Mathis became known as the Gentleman of Song. His ballads like Misty Chances Are and It's Not For Me to Say sold millions, helping him earn a spot among the best-selling artists of the 20th century, with over 350 million records sold worldwide. His image was polished and wholesome, the perfect suit, the gentle smile, the romantic voice every woman wanted to hear. Yet for decades, that perfection hid a deeply personal truth. In 1982, during a rare interview, Mathis casually stated, "Homosexuality is a way of life that I've grown accustomed to." The remark was shocking for the time and appeared in a magazine almost without context. Almost immediately it caused a stir, then silence. Mathis himself said little afterward, retreating from the subject as if it had never been spoken. This sudden retreat left fans and the press with questions that were never answered. Unlike more flamboyant performers, Johnny Mathis kept his private life behind locked doors. He rarely attended Hollywood parties, avoided the gossip columns, and maintained an aura of mystery. His silence became both his shield and his statement. He didn't deny what he said, but he didn't confirm it either. In an era hostile to LGBTQ identities, this middle path allowed him to preserve his career while leaving the truth hovering in the air like an unresolved note. Colleagues often described Mathis as quiet and dignified, someone who poured his emotions into music rather than interviews. Fans began listening to his songs differently after that single 1982 remark. Lyrics from Misty or Chances Are took on a new layer of meaning as audiences wondered, who was he truly singing to? Was there an unseen love behind the words, a story that could never be told aloud? This ambiguity made his music even more poignant, transforming his ballads into timeless mysteries of longing. Though Johnny Mathis never became a scandalous figure, his restraint reflects the reality of his era. For a black artist moving between jazz pop and R&B in the 1950s and 1960s, simply surviving in the industry was already a triumph. Adding the weight of coming out publicly might have cost him everything. Instead, he chose a life of discretion, letting his artistry speak louder than his private truth. Now, in his later years, Mathis is celebrated as a legend, still performing and still enchanting audiences with the same velvet voice that first captivated the world. His story, however, remains a quiet one, a story of music that revealed everything, and a man who revealed almost nothing. Billy Preston. Billy Preston's fingerprints are all over modern music, even if his personal story remained hidden in the shadows. Born in 1946 in Houston, Texas, he was a child prodigy who played the organ by age 3 and performed with gospel great Mahalia Jackson before turning 10. By his teens, he was already working with Little Richard and Ray Charles, absorbing the rhythms of soul and gospel that would shape his career. His ability on the keyboard was unmatched, so much so that the Beatles themselves brought him into their sessions, making him the only musician ever credited on one of their singles, Get Back as the Beatles with Billy Preston. But behind this dazzling career was a truth Billy Preston never shared publicly. Colleagues and close friends quietly acknowledged he was gay, yet the industry's unforgiving climate forced him into silence. The contradiction was painful. On stage, he embodied freedom, bending sound into explosions of joy, yet in private he guarded his heart, terrified of being exposed. The era offered little space for a black R&B artist to live openly. The risk of ridicule, lost contracts, or outright rejection kept him locked in a personal cage. He worked with titans Aretha Franklin, the Rolling Stones, Sly Stone, and George Harrison. His own hits like Nothing from Nothing, Outta Space, and Will It Go Round in Circles topped the charts in the 1970s, winning him a Grammy and cementing his place in music history. Audiences saw a man full of energy and joy, but friends described the loneliness that crept in when the stage lights dimmed. He longed to share love openly, but knew the consequences could be devastating. Later in life, as his health declined from kidney disease and complications of hypertension, Preston became more candid with a few close confidants. In those private moments, he admitted how exhausting it had been to hide how much he wished he could have been free. Still, there was never a public statement. His truth remained confined to whispers among those who knew him well. Preston passed away in 2006 at the age of 59, leaving behind a legacy of brilliance and mystery. His music symbolized boundless creativity. His fingers danced across keyboards with no restraint, yet his personal life remained bound by silence. That paradox is what makes his story both inspiring and heartbreaking. He was a man who gave freedom to the world through music, but was denied freedom for himself. Billy Preston is remembered as more than just the fifth Beatle. He is a reminder of the unseen struggles many artists endured, the weight of secrets, the silence forced upon them, and the cost of living in a world not ready to accept them. His notes still echo with joy, but between those joyful bursts, you can almost hear the unplayed chords of a truth he was never able to sing aloud. Donny Hathaway. Donny Hathaway was a once-in-a-generation talent, a voice that could stop a room with its power and fragility. Born in 1945 in Chicago, Illinois, he was raised by his grandmother, a professional gospel singer who nurtured his gift from an early age. By the time he attended Howard University in Washington, D.C., his mastery of piano and arrangement had already set him apart. He quickly became one of the most gifted composers and performers of the 1970s, blending gospel, jazz, R&B, and classical influences into music that touched the soul. His songs, remain unforgettable. A song for you. This Christmas. Someday we'll all be free, and his duets with Roberta Flack, like Where Is the Love, became anthems of love and human connection. Hathaway's ability to pour raw emotion into every note earned him Grammy Awards and the respect of peers across the industry. On stage, his voice soared. In the studio, his genius seemed endless. Yet beneath the applause, he lived with storms the public could not see. Friends and collaborators quietly whispered that Hathaway carried secrets, including possible romantic affections for male colleagues. These rumors were never confirmed, but they lingered because of the sensitivity and tenderness embedded in his lyrics. Combined with his battles against mental illness diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, these whispers painted a portrait of a man carrying burdens too heavy to share. Hathaway himself sometimes vanished during recording sessions, lost in his own struggles, before returning to deliver music that felt almost sacred. When you listen to Donny Hathaway's songs, do you hear only a performer, or do you feel the hidden pain of a man crying out through music? In truth, Hathaway's personal life was shrouded in contradictions. While he was a devoted father and husband, he also carried a loneliness that no family or fame could erase. His lyrics often read like diary entries. The hope in "someday we'll all be free" resonates as both a universal call and a private plea for liberation. To this day, fans interpret his music as a reflection of truths he never spoke aloud. His tragic end shocked the music world. On January 13, 1979, at just 33 years old, Donny Hathaway fell to his death from a New York hotel window. Officially ruled a suicide, his passing devastated the industry and left behind unanswered questions. Did his illness overwhelm him? Did his secrets add to the torment? No one will ever fully know, but his early death sealed his legacy as one of music's most haunting figures. Despite the tragedy, Hathaway's influence continues to ripple through generations. Artists like Alicia Keys, John Legend, and Stevie Wonder cite him as a guiding light. His songs are still covered, his voice still cherished, and his story still evokes compassion. Donny Hathaway remains a legend not just because of his immense talent, but because his music revealed glimpses of the man he never fully allowed the world to see, a man of brilliance, tenderness, and unbearable silence. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye was more than just a singer. He was the very heartbeat of Motown, a man whose music captured the complexities of love, desire, and social struggle. Born in 1939 in Washington, D.C., Gaye rose from gospel choirs to become one of the defining voices of the 1960s and 1970s. His hits, "Ain't No Mountain High Enough, Let's Get It On," "Sexual Healing" sold millions, with Gaye amassing over 25 top 10 singles on the Billboard charts. His smooth baritone, sensual delivery, and fearless songwriting earned him the nickname Prince of Motown, while his album What's Going On became one of the most acclaimed records in music history. But while the public saw him as a symbol of romance and protest behind the stage lights, Marvin lived a life of turbulence and secrecy. He was a man divided, torn between his strict religious upbringing, the demands of the Motown machine, and the whispers about his private relationships. Friends and industry insiders often described him as restless, elusive, and haunted by an inner conflict. In later years, rumors circulated about Marvin's relationships beyond the women he serenaded in song. In a controversial 2018 interview, producer Quincy Jones claimed Marvin had been romantically involved with actor Marlon Brando, a statement Marvin's family quickly denied. Still, the rumor added fuel to the long-standing speculation that Gaye's desires may not have fit neatly into the public's expectations. Fans began to revisit his lyrics, especially in songs like "Let's Get It On" or "Sexual Healing," wondering if they were broader expressions of desire than originally believed. The ambiguity only made Marvin more magnetic. His ability to blur lines between sacred and sensual, between personal pain and universal truth, gave his music a haunting depth. But his personal life was marked by turmoil, strained relationships, struggles with substance abuse, financial troubles, and a deep rift with his father. a strict minister whose disapproval weighed heavily on him. Marvin sought refuge in music, often recording songs that seemed like confessions wrapped in melody. What's Going On was not only a masterpiece of social commentary, but also an outpouring of his private anguish about the world and his own battles. His voice carried both intimacy and distance, as though he was revealing everything and hiding everything at once. Tragically, Marvin's life ended violently. On April 1, 1984, at the age of 44, he was shot and killed by his father during a domestic dispute just one day before his birthday. His death shocked the world and cemented his legacy as one of music's greatest yet most tragic figures. Marvin Gaye remains immortal not only for his extraordinary catalog of songs, but also for the mystery of his heart. He was a man who gave the world passion, protest, and vulnerability, yet kept his deepest truths veiled. That veil has become part of his legend, an unfinished story woven into every note he ever sang. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston was the epitome of stardom, an artist whose voice could lift an audience into awe with a single note. Born in 1963 in Newark, New Jersey, she was destined for greatness. Raised in a musical family with gospel roots through her mother Cissy Houston and connections to icons like Dionne Warwick and Aretha Franklin, Whitney carried the sound of the church into the mainstream. By the 1980s, she was a global phenomenon. With over 200 million records sold worldwide, she became one of the best-selling artists of all time. Hits like I Will Always Love You, Greatest Love of All, and How Will I Know secured her crown as the voice. But behind the dazzling smile and record-breaking career, Whitney carried a secret that followed her until her tragic death. Throughout her life, she was closely tied to Robin Crawford, her childhood friend, assistant, and constant companion. The two were inseparable, often appearing side by side in public, their bond unmistakable. Rumors swirled for decades that their relationship went beyond friendship. Yet Whitney never confirmed anything, and Robin remained silent until 2019 when she published her memoir, A Song for You, My Life, with Whitney Houston. In it, Crawford admitted their relationship had been intimate and loving, though Whitney ultimately chose to end the romantic part of their bond to protect her career. Whitney's silence was shaped by the era she lived in. For a black female pop star marketed as America's sweetheart, any deviation from the perfect heterosexual image could have been career-ending. Executives, family, and the public all had expectations, leaving Whitney to lock away her most vulnerable truth. The pressure weighed heavily on her. In interviews, Whitney often deflected questions about her personal life, keeping the focus on her music. Yet fans sensed a loneliness beneath the glamour. Even in her marriage to Bobby Brown, a union marred by turbulence and addiction, Whitney never seemed at peace. Many who knew her privately suggested that part of her struggles stemmed from suppressing her true self in an industry and society not ready to accept her. Her voice, however, never betrayed her. When she sang I Will Always Love You, listeners felt an ache that seemed to come from a place deeper than mere performance. Every ballad, every high note carried a weight of longing, as though she was channeling the love she could never fully claim in public. Whitney Houston's life ended in tragedy on February 11, 2012, when she was found dead at the age of 48 in a Beverly Hills hotel. Her death stunned the world, cutting short a life that had given so much joy, yet endured so much hidden sorrow. Her legacy is eternal. Whitney remains not only the greatest female voice of her era, but also a symbol of the cost of silence. She showed the world how to love through song, but never had the freedom to love openly in her own life. That haunting truth only deepens the power of her music, making every note she sang resonate like a secret finally set free. Teddy Pendergrass. Teddy Pendergrass was the very definition of soul and sensuality. Born in 1950 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, he began his musical journey as a drummer before joining Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes in the early 1970s. With his commanding baritone, he quickly became the group's standout voice, leading hits like If You Don't Know Me by Now. By the mid-1970s, he launched a solo career that turned him into one of R&B's most powerful male icons. Songs like Close the Door, Love TKO, and Turn Off the Lights earned him the title King of Seduction, adored by millions of women who packed his famous for women-only concerts. But the image of Teddy as the ultimate ladies' man masked rumors he never confronted publicly. Industry insiders whispered about same-sex relationships, pointing to his extremely private lifestyle and ambiguous friendships. The gossip intensified after his life-altering accident in 1982, when a car crash left him paralyzed from the chest down at the age of 31. Some claimed the circumstances surrounding the crash hinted at hidden truths, though Teddy himself never confirmed or denied the speculation. Despite his disability, Pendergrass refused to disappear. He returned to the stage in 1985 at Live Aid, performing to a roaring crowd and proving his voice had lost none of its fire. His resilience became part of his legend, inspiring fans worldwide. Still, the questions about his private life lingered. Was Teddy hiding a truth that could have redefined his legacy? Or was the mystery itself what made him larger than life? The paradox of Teddy Pendergrass is that his voice carried unrestrained passion, yet his life was bound by restraint. In interviews, he masterfully deflected questions about his relationships, keeping the focus on music and survival. Fans continued to swoon at his ballads, never realizing they might have been inspired by loves the world never knew. Like many black artists of his generation, Teddy faced an impossible choice: authenticity or survival. Even in his later years, when he wrote his autobiography Truly Blessed, 1998, he remained vague about his personal life. Instead, he emphasized resilience, faith, and gratitude, leaving the most intimate details unsaid. To many, his story became less about scandal and more about courage, the ability to endure unimaginable pain and still create beauty from it. Teddy Pendergrass passed away in 2010 at the age of 59, following complications from colon cancer. His death marked the loss of one of R&B's most distinctive voices. Fans mourned not only the artist who gave them timeless love songs, but also the man whose life remained shrouded in unanswered questions. His legacy endures in every slow jam that plays on a quiet night, in every lyric that melts hearts. Teddy Pendergrass remains a figure of fire and mystery, a man who embodied desire on stage but lived with secrets off it, leaving us to wonder what truths might have been hidden behind his unforgettable songs. Phyllis Hyman. Phyllis Hyman was a woman whose voice could both seduce and shatter hearts. Born in 1949 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, she grew up in a large working-class family, turning to music as her path out of hardship. By the mid-1970s, her striking 6-foot frame, regal stage presence, and unmistakable contralto voice had made her one of the most recognizable figures in R&B and jazz. Her early hit You Know How to Love Me, 1979, showcased her soaring power and cemented her reputation as one of the most promising vocalists of her time. Through the 1980s, Hyman continued to carve a space in the R&B world, releasing acclaimed albums like Living All Alone, 1986. The title track became an anthem for those who felt the sting of loneliness. Her voice, deep, soulful, and drenched in emotion, captured feelings that were rarely expressed so openly in mainstream music. Fans adored her honesty, but behind the curtain, Phyllis carried burdens she rarely spoke about. Whispers followed her throughout her career. In backstage conversations and among industry insiders, there were persistent rumors that Phyllis had intimate relationships with women as well as men. These rumors were never confirmed publicly, and Hyman herself never addressed them directly. Instead, she poured her truths into her songs. Listeners began to wonder, were the lyrics about longing and isolation reflections of her secret struggles? Was her music her only safe confession? Phyllis also battled severe depression throughout her life. In interviews, she admitted to feeling lonely despite her fame and beauty. Friends often described her as radiant on stage but fragile in private. The pressures of the music industry, demanding labels, financial struggles, and the stigma around mental health compounded her sense of isolation. For a black female artist in the 1980s, acknowledging same-sex love would have been considered career suicide, adding yet another weight to her shoulders. By the early 1990s, Hyman's career had slowed, though she remained respected by peers and beloved by her loyal fans. Yet the loneliness and despair she often sang about were not just artistic expressions. They were reflections of her lived experience. On June 30th, 1995, just hours before a scheduled performance at the Apollo Theater in Harlem, Phyllis Hyman took her own life at the age of 45. In her final note, she wrote that she was tired and could no longer continue. Her passing devastated the music world. Fans mourned not only the loss of an extraordinary voice, but also the tragedy of a life that carried so much unspoken pain. In hindsight, her songs feel like letters she left behind, layered with meanings that went beyond the surface. Phyllis Hyman remains a soul diva whose legacy is twofold. She gave the world some of the most hauntingly beautiful love songs, and she embodied the struggles of those forced to live in silence. Her story is a reminder that even the brightest stars can be dimmed by secrets and sorrow, leaving us with music that aches with both beauty and loss. Billy Paul. Billy Paul, born Paul Williams in 1934 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, was one of the smoothest and most distinctive voices of the Philadelphia soul movement. A singer trained in both jazz and gospel, his career spanned more than 5 decades, but it was the 1972 release of Me and Mrs. Jones that defined him. The song, with its sultry storytelling and unforgettable melody, reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, won a Grammy Award for Best Male R&B Vocal Performance, and sold over 2 million copies worldwide. Overnight, Billy Paul became a household name, celebrated for his ability to blend the intimacy of jazz with the emotional pull of R&B. But behind the fame and success lay unanswered questions that followed him throughout his life. Billy was a private man who rarely granted interviews or shared details about his personal affairs. This silence fueled speculation. Among insiders in the Philadelphia music scene, whispers circulated that Paul may have had same-sex relationships. These rumors were never confirmed, and Billy himself never commented directly. But the curiosity lingered, shaping the way some fans and critics looked at his career. Part of the fascination came from the duality of his music. On one hand, Me and Mrs. Jones painted the picture of a forbidden heterosexual affair, a man and a woman meeting at the same cafe at the same time. On the other hand, listeners began to wonder if Billy Paul had written about a different kind of secret love, would he have been allowed to sing it? The speculation gave his music layers of meaning, turning love songs into possible masks for deeper truths. Throughout the 1970s, Billy released several other albums, including 360 Degrees of Billy Paul and War of the Gods, works that blended social commentary with sensuality. He stood out for his willingness to experiment, fusing R&B with elements of funk gospel and political messages. Yet his public image remained carefully controlled. While contemporaries like Marvin Gaye openly battled labels and personal demons in the spotlight, Billy Paul avoided such exposure, choosing mystery instead. This secrecy kept his legacy complicated. To some, he was simply the voice behind one of the greatest R&B ballads of all time. To others, he was an enigmatic figure whose songs hinted at more than they revealed. Even decades after his peak, conversations about Billy often returned not just to his artistry, but also to the life he kept locked away. Billy Paul passed away in 2016 at the age of 81 after a battle with pancreatic cancer. In death, as in life, the questions remained. His fans mourned not only the man who had given them one of the most iconic love songs in history, but also the secrets he never had the chance or perhaps the freedom to share. Billy Paul remains a legend of Philadelphia soul, a man whose velvet voice told the world about love and longing, while his own truths were left between the lines, buried in the silence of his private world. Sylvester James Jr. Sylvester James Jr., known simply as Sylvester, was one of the boldest and most influential performers of the disco and R&B era. Born in 1947 in Los Angeles, California, he grew up singing gospel music in church but was quickly ostracized for his effeminate mannerisms and unapologetic individuality. Refusing to conform, Sylvester ran away as a teenager and joined San Francisco's vibrant counterculture, finding a home among drag queens, queer collectives, and underground music circles. From those beginnings, he forged a career that would make him a global icon, even as his personal truth remained shrouded in both flamboyance and silence. By the late 1970s, Sylvester had become the dazzling face of disco. His single "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real" became an international anthem, climbing the Billboard charts and selling millions worldwide. With his soaring falsetto, glittering costumes, and unapologetic stage presence, he stood apart in an industry dominated by carefully constructed heterosexual images. He wasn't just a performer, he was a revelation. Fans marveled at the way he blurred gender boundaries, challenging the norms of both black R&B and mainstream pop. Yet while his stage persona was flamboyant and unapologetically queer-coded, Sylvester himself stopped short of making public declarations about his sexuality. In interviews, he often sidestepped direct questions, instead insisting that his music spoke for itself. This left him in a complex position. He was celebrated as a symbol of liberation, but still carried the silence imposed by an era in which being openly gay, especially as a black artist, risked both career and personal safety. His career flourished despite resistance from some record executives who were uncomfortable with his image. He became a hero in LGBTQ nightclubs and among disco devotees, a pioneer who showed that authenticity could be expressed through art, even when words remained unspoken. At the same time, his mainstream recognition never reached the level of other disco stars, a sign of the barriers he faced for being too much in a world still hostile to difference. Tragedy struck in the 1980s when Sylvester was diagnosed with HIV/AIDS, a disease that was ravaging the LGBTQ community. True to his character, he continued to perform, his voice still soaring even as his health declined. In his final years, he became more candid, openly supporting AIDS awareness and using his platform to speak about the crisis, though he never officially came out in the way later generations would understand. Sylvester passed away in 1988, at the age of 41, leaving behind a legacy that has only grown more powerful with time. He is now remembered as the Queen of Disco, a trailblazer who showed that glamour, soul, and freedom could exist even within the confines of silence. His music still fills dance floors, his voice still inspires liberation, and his story still reminds us of the price many artists paid just to survive. Sylvester's life was mighty real, but also painfully restrained, a paradox that makes him unforgettable. Jermaine Stewart. Jermaine Stewart's rise to fame was as colorful and energetic as his performances. Born in 1957 in Columbus, Ohio, he moved with his family to Chicago, where he grew up, obsessed with music and dance. In the late 1970s, he pursued his dream with unrelenting passion, first as a dancer on Soul Train, and then as a background vocalist for major stars like Shalimar and The Temptations. By the mid-1980s, Jermaine had stepped into the spotlight, ready to carve out a place for himself in the crowded world of R&B and pop. His big break came in 1986 with the release of "We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off," a playful yet moralizing anthem that reached number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became an international hit. The single sold millions and turned Jermaine into a household name almost overnight. His vibrant image, stylish fashion, and dance-friendly tracks made him a favorite of MTV, earning him a loyal fan base across the United States and Europe. But while the world saw a flamboyant, joyful performer, Jermaine carried a private truth that was rarely spoken aloud. Friends and colleagues often hinted that he was gay, but Jermaine never publicly confirmed his sexuality. In the 1980s, when AIDS hysteria dominated headlines and homophobia remained rampant, coming out as a black R&B artist was seen as professional suicide. Instead, Jermaine deflected attention from his private life and focused on his music, projecting an image that was safe enough for the mainstream while coded enough for those who understood. Though he released several albums, including Frantic Romantic and Say It Again, none matched the success of his breakthrough. By the early 1990s, Jermaine's career had cooled, but he remained active in the industry, touring internationally and performing for devoted fans who still cherished his unique voice and stage presence. Behind the scenes, however, his health began to decline. In 1997, Jermaine Stewart died at just 39 years old from complications related to AIDS. His passing devastated those who had admired his talent and energy, but it also underscored the heavy silence many queer Black artists of his generation endured. Like Luther Vandross, Billy Preston, and others, Jermaine left behind whispers instead of declarations, music instead of memoirs. His story is bittersweet. On one hand, he gave the world a timeless anthem that still plays on dance floors and radio stations today. On the other, he lived in a time when fear forced him to sidestep his truth, leaving fans to piece together his legacy from fragments and speculation. Jermaine Stewart remains a symbol of both joy and tragedy, a man who made the world dance, who reminded us that intimacy doesn't always mean exposure, and whose silence speaks volumes about the price of fame in an unforgiving era. His life, though short, continues to echo through the rhythms of a song that feels as relevant now as it did the day it was released. These 15 legends gave us timeless music, yet carried secrets too heavy for their time. Their voices celebrated freedom while their hearts lived in silence. We can only imagine how different their lives might have been if the world had embraced them fully. Their stories remind us that behind fame lies vulnerability, and behind every melody, there may be an untold truth. Were they protecting their careers, or were they robbed of the right to live openly? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us here on Legends of Black Excellence.